It's a beautiful day here in Brightside, California. We're at the Brightside Yard of the Niles Canyon Railway. My name is Henry Baum, and I'm the current president of the Pacific Locomotive Association. We are the owner-operators of the Niles Canyon Railway, and we've been doing this here in the canyon since 1987, and we do it for the community's benefit. We're trying to preserve history, right? The fact that the right of way that we run on is the last link of the Transcontinental Railroad everybody learned about in school because it was important. It's still important, and it's still here, and that's what we're trying to preserve and protect for future generations. I'm standing here by the Clover Valley number 4, which is our Malley locomotive. It's a compound locomotive. In this case, it's a 2662. So it has 2 sets of drivers, right? And the steam gets used in the primary set of drivers, which are the ones closest to the cab. And then the exhaust steam goes into the front cylinders and drives the front set of drivers. That way you're actually using the steam twice, and Malleys are famous for that. There's only a handful of operational Malleys left in the United States. We have this one, and we also are home for the Columbia River Beltline number 7, which is a 2442. So that's on loan to the PLA. We're running and keeping that one operational. This locomotive just turned 100 years old. We celebrated its birthday last weekend, and we're very proud of the fact that it's still here, that it's still running, and that's all thanks to our steam crew. These drivers came out of our SP 1744 locomotive, which is undergoing restoration here. You may have seen videos of us putting new tires on these wheels. People didn't realize that when you had a big steam locomotive, you had these giant cast wheels. And if you were using them and you had to slam on the brakes, or it was icy and your wheels started to spin, you can create flat spots on the wheels. And if you've got these gigantic castings with flat spots, you can't fix them. So somewhere in the 1840s or 50s, I'm not sure well, when they realized that you could put steel tires on these, and then that would be just like the rubber tires on your car. That would be the part you replace when you damage them or they wear out. So again, there are videos that you can look at that will show you the process involved in putting new tires on these wheels. You have to have the tires made to exacting standards, and then you heat them up so they expand. You slip them over the cast wheel and you let them shrink, and you're good to go. When we got the SP 1744 from Colorado, we didn't realize how bad the wheels actually were. So we had to create a new program for getting new tires, putting them on. The old tires were badly worn and had been shimmed a number of times to keep them in place. If you look at this wheel, you see there's a great big weight on one side of the wheel. And then there's a great big pin up here. This is where the drive beam actually gets connected. But because that puts a lot of weight on this side of the wheel, you have to add a lot of weight on that side of the wheel to keep it balanced. And all of these wheels are different because you don't want them all going high and low at the same time. So you stagger them. That's just the science. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I like to talk about all these things nobody ever notices. Now I'm leaning on the undercarriage, the substructure of the 1744 locomotive. And it doesn't look like a steam locomotive at the moment, but it is pretty much the bulk of a steam locomotive is in this ironwork. The structure up above, that's where the boiler will sit. The boiler is currently being restored by Stockton Locomotive Works up in Fort Bragg, California. We started working on the undercarriage. We knew we'd have to paint it and things like that, but then, as with most steam locomotives, when you take them apart, you find all the band-aids that had been added to it over the years to keep it running that you couldn't see because there were other parts that were covering it up. We're in the process now of redoing the spring hangers and all the structure that makes the undercarriage able to support the weight of the boiler, which is a very, very heavy thing. And all of these parts are going to get hot when you run it because of the steam. So when you're rebuilding these things, you have to take into account you're building them at room temperature, but they're going to run at 250, 300 degrees when they're out on the road. You have to make those adjustments. And a lot of times those adjustments aren't made properly and the locomotive gets beat up because of it. So we found several areas here where the basic frame of the locomotive had been worn away just from the constant hammering of the boiler and things bouncing down the tracks. So all of that missing, worn away material has to be put back. And we've got a welder who's been doing that work. He's doing a bang up job. And we've also found a lot of the holes. You've got shafts and bolts and things like that. And over the years, a lot of these round holes become oblong. And they don't work the way they were intended. So as part of restoring the locomotive, you got to go through and turn those oblong holes back into round holes. And it takes a lot of people. None of this happens quickly, right? It can take months of work, especially if you're only working 1 day a week, to get something done out here. But it takes people with distinct skills, and it takes people willing to learn. We've had a lot of people over the years who have come out here, learned to do this stuff, and have moved on to other places and have taken that skill with them. We're very proud of those people that were trained and built here. And we expect probably, I'll say next year, but probably the year after, that this locomotive will be back together. And if it steams up properly, we'll be able to run it. And this will then probably become our workhorse locomotive because it's just the right size for our operation here. And now I'm leaning on one of our more recent acquisitions. This is the SP 2479, a big Pacific locomotive that ran on the peninsula in commuter service. It's a sister engine to the 2472 that is with Golden Gate Railroad Museum, and the 2467, which was restored by the Niles Canyon Railway steam team and has now been transferred to the State Railroad Museum up in Sacramento. This one was donated to us by the County of Santa Clara, and it's in the process of being restored. Hopefully in the next 4 years or so, we can have this one up and running. And we're going to run it every weekend? No, right? We will run it maybe 4 times a year. Special excursions, right? Big money excursions with big money trains behind them to justify heating this thing up. We would be completely remiss on any video filmed here at Brightside without stopping and visiting the SP 9010. This is the Krauss Maffei built locomotive. It was built in Munich in 1963. It was owned by the Southern Pacific Railroad, and after about 4 years of use, they scrapped them all, except they didn't scrap this one because they had an alternate use for it. They cut the nose off, cut all these superfluous parts off of it, built a plywood box on the front and filled it with 35 millimeter film equipment. And they would then shove this locomotive, not running, but just providing weight, shove it all over the SP right away, taking movies that would be used in the first generation of locomotive simulators for training locomotive engineers. That's the only reason this locomotive survived, was because it was massively heavy. And if you shoved it down the track, it would bounce all over the place. We received a locomotive 12 years ago or so from the California State Railroad Museum. It was never our intention to do anything but cosmetically restore it. We knew it would just be a showpiece as the last surviving example of this kind of locomotive. It's diesel hydraulic, not diesel electric. So, it's so vastly different from anything else you're going to find in this country. And it needed to be preserved. So we took that job on at the PLA. Howard Wise became the project leader on this. He realized that there was enough of this locomotive still here to allow us to MU it, so we could use this locomotive to control another locomotive that actually had an engine that ran, right? Because we knew these engines on this locomotive would never run again, and there was no way to transfer the power from the engines to the wheels. All that stuff had been cut off and is irreplaceable. So Howard got to work, and he put this together in a way that would allow them to control another locomotive with it. That ability really started driving the restoration of this locomotive. Maybe we can do something with this. Maybe we can give it a life again. And that apparently captured the rail fan imagination around the world. People in Europe, in Germany, in England, South America, all started looking at this locomotive again and going, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? Wouldn't it be great if we could do that? And as time went on, parts that were missing from this locomotive began showing up. A lot of the things out of the cab when these locomotives were scrapped had been taken as souvenirs by the people up in Sacramento to put in their rumpus rooms and show people, that they worked for the railroad. When they got wind of us restoring this locomotive, they started bringing these things back. Some people went even further. There was a gentleman in England who did some looking, and he determined that when these things were cut up and scrapped, 5 sets of bogies from 5 of the cut-up locomotives had been sent to Austria to a company that makes maintenance of way equipment. And they use those bogies in quarter-mile-long machines called ballast cleaners that would go down the right-of-way, scoop the ballast out from under the track, shake all the dirt out of the rock, put the rock back down, tamp it, and move on. This thing was a slow-moving piece of equipment, and geared trucks were perfect for that. So it turned out he found that one of those machines was still in existence in France. We contacted the owner, who agreed when they scrapped it to allow us to buy the bogies from them, because that would then give us the geared trucks. And that would take us one step closer to making this an operational locomotive. So we started then working earnestly in trying to determine what will it take to make this locomotive run under its own power. So Howard and his team began working on the rear prime mover, which is in that last set of cabinets down there in the hood. It's a Maybach 16-cylinder turbocharged diesel engine, and its entire function is to drive the transmission behind it which is a series of torque converters. Those torque converters take the power from the engine, transfer it down into a drive shaft that goes down to the geared bogies down here on the tracks and makes the locomotive move. Very unique technology for the United States in particular. It was also a huge pain in the neck technology for SP, which was one of the reasons they got rid of these things after 4 years. It was just too much of an effort to keep them running. They had alternatives at that time, so they decided to scrap them. Once we took on the challenge of getting the engine running again, there are people in Europe, gentleman Rob Fern in England, he's an expert on these diesel engines. He helped us get this one running again. You know, the farm engine will never run again because it has had serious damage before SP had even decided to scrap these things. But we knew that the back engine was in reasonably good shape. So we put the effort in to get it running. And on Valentine's Day, I want to say 2019 or 20, that engine actually roared to life. Parts are still available, believe it or not, for that engine. But it's been restored. It runs again. We're still tweaking now, making the final changes. We've identified some systems that we just don't have the parts, and we'll just won't be able to do it the way it was originally done. So we're just going to do a workaround and do it as a separate driven entity off the engine. It's a 2,500 horsepower engine that we're using, so we have plenty of power to spare. We will have this engine up and running again. It will, like the 2479, probably be used on special excursion operations that we will do maybe 3 or 4 times a year to make money. Now we're actually standing in the heart, in the kitchen of the Great Northern Ranch car. This was the Great Northern 1242. It had a name, the Hidden Lake. All of the ranch cars were named after lakes in the Pacific Northwest. This was Hidden Lake when it was operational. This car ran on the Empire Builder between Chicago and Seattle. And while it had a full first-class diner, the ranch car was actually the snack shop or the coffee shop for the train. So when the diner wasn't in use, you could still come down here and get a shake or a sundae or ice cream, slice of pie, coffee, sandwich, things like that. So it was a full kitchen in here. You have the nice 10-burner gas range. It has a deep fryer for all your French fries and fish fillets and other deep fried goodness. It was a big thing at the time. This ran in the 50s and 60s, and it was unusual to have deep fried food on a train. Probably not a very nice place to work because of the temperature in here. You'll notice it's all stainless steel, so heat is radiated constantly. I have spent the last 3 years basically cleaning this kitchen. 50, 60 years of grease had accumulated. Only the surfaces that showed ever got cleaned. So basically I've been cleaning all the surfaces that never showed. So you got to take it all apart, get to the back, make it all functional again. I completely rebuilt the French fryers so it works. The stove and the ovens have been reworked, fixed the doors on the ovens, and slowly putting everything back together so that it will be capable of cooking. This counter here was just like the one at Woolworth's. You would go to and get your French fries or your ice cream sundae or your cheeseburger. it was a full function. This was the ice cream well and an ice cream scoop container here. It had chilled water dispensers. I mean, this was completely self-contained and ready for whatever they might need to do. The ranch motif was carried through with a branding iron motif, and all the ranch cars had this mural in them. I still need to find somebody who can help me restore it. It's such a cool part of this, and it really helps with the ranch car theme that they wanted. Now I want to welcome you to the Niles district of Fremont. Used to be called the town of Niles. Before it was even that, it was the town of Vallejo Mills back in the 1850s. I wanted to bring you down here to show you the property that we have to work with, because it is the PLA's intention to develop this property into a world-class railroad museum. Now, if you look over my shoulder here, you'll see the buildings, the little ticket office that we have today. We're going to replace those buildings at some point in time with a recreation of the original 1870s depot that was located here until the depot you see on the other side of the tracks was built. So that will be our main station, boarding platform, and things like that will all be behind us there. There may be a water tower there. There will be a lot of development here, other little buildings as well. But that's what will be going on in that direction. Most of that will be parking. Now, and as part of the development here, the area behind us will become sort of like a gardens, a depot gardens, where we expect to have picnic areas and things like that, maybe a signal garden. We also intend to recreate some of the original buildings that were here when this was a working yard on the Central Pacific, the Southern Pacific. This area was actually primarily worker housing. So there was actually an apartment building here for the workers with families. There were some smaller buildings. There was the superintendent's house was here. We intend to recreate those buildings, not as residences so much, but just to represent what used to be here. We can use those areas for meeting rooms and storage and things like that, but we will have those buildings. We will use one of these buildings for our caretaker to live in, because we will have to protect the things that are down here. This is the interior of the Niles Y. So if you look at the map drawing of this was an actual Y for turning trains in different directions. It's also where the trains coming from the east would turn to go north to go to Oakland, or turn and go south heading towards San Jose. So Niles was a major turning point for the railroads, and all the trains came through here from 1869 to 1879, when the Carquinez car ferry went into service. And then trains coming from the east would all go that way and end up in Oakland and take either a ferry into San Francisco or head on down to San Jose. So our intent is to recreate in this direction that you're looking. You will be looking right into the 5-stall San Jose roundhouse that was donated to us by Santa Clara County. The roundhouse at San Jose was originally a 15-stall roundhouse. As steam started to fade away, they cut the roundhouse down to 5 stalls. That's what was deconstructed by the UP when they donated the roundhouse to Santa Clara County. We are going to recreate that 5-stall roundhouse. Then we're going to skip a few stalls, and then we're going to build a 3-stall roundhouse all new construction in the same style as the 5 stalls that we have, but longer, because one of the problems with these old roundhouses is that many steam locomotives don't fit inside of them, right? So like the big Pacific you saw with its tender, if they put that in the roundhouse, the tender was sticking out and was never inside. Well, we want to be able to put these locomotives inside, close the doors, protect them that way when they're in service and being used. So that big roundhouse will probably be used for the Kraus Maffei, the 2479, and something else probably. We'll get something else big to put in there as time goes on. So we will basically have 2 roundhouses down here and the turntable. And behind the roundhouses on this side will also probably be our water tank, which was donated to us. So it's a 65,000 gallon water tank. That a similar one was actually on this side by the depot. If you find old pictures of the original depot, you'll see a water tank there. But we're going to recreate the water tank that was behind the roundhouses when it was down in San Jose. Okay, so now we've stepped outside the Y. We're actually on the east side of the property here, which again is where the gardens are going to be. This whole area behind me, where you see those containers down there, eventually will become a 30,000 square foot exhibition hall. Just like any world-class museum, a place to have your interpretive displays will be here. My current vision for this is that we will build this building first, but it will be a temporary building. So we're looking at putting up basically a giant tent here that we can use to build track into it. So you can see that we can have several tracks going into this building here. And I can start storing equipment down here undercover. All this equipment that's sitting up in Brightside getting cooked, I'd be able to bring down here and protect inside this building while we develop the other buildings, the roundhouses, the depot, get the turntable installed. That can all happen. And then the equipment from these buildings can be moved into the other buildings and this building replaced with a permanent exhibition hall structure. So again, just to give you some idea of scale, if you look behind me, you can see the white bridge that is the actual turntable that we will be installing. It's an 80-foot turntable. There will be a big 80-foot diameter pit that bridge will be put in, servicing the roundhouses. There is a lot of work that needs to be done down here. We are still in the planning stages, still in the concept development of what we want to do. But it's really going to take a lot of effort of a lot of people to get this all put together, get the proper permitting done, and raise the money it's going to take to erect these structures. It'll be much prettier when the buildings are built and the SP palm trees have been replanted, and it will be gorgeous, but it's still 10, 12 years away. I need you to understand it cannot happen without your help, right? We're always on the lookout for volunteers. We're going to need donations to these projects. It will happen in stages, so I don't need you to give me $10 million today. You can just give me $1 million today and another $1 million next year and things like that. But we need to grow the funding for this. We need to get this all put together, and it cannot happen without the help of the railroading community. And we really want you to be a part of it with us. So join us on this trip, and we should all see it together. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you along the rails.